Ben.
How's it going?
Thank God. Good. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. Just my children are like in these youth groups now over here, and that like changed like the whole schedule. Like randomly, they're coming home with like friends and bikes, and like there's just a whole
shebang.
It's a whole new experience.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Good week.
Good week. Yeah.
I'm very glad to hear that,
Nice,
sir. And
Yes.
you're learning with Jacob. Going well?
It went well. Yeah, we had another session yesterday discussing.
Actually, I did notice that there was. I didn't see it, but I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, no way, it's going well.
You
said you were setting up everything, kind of your week in the.
Right. So tomorrow's my my official day off. My official day working from home. Not my day off at home. It's just a day that I'm going to be working from home. Will make certain things easier with regards to like the kids. And yeah, yesterday we had the first night of the kollel, the Beit Midrash, the learning seminary, or I don't know if learning seminary, but learning schedule sort of for our new community. So everyone was coming in and, different people learning in different groups, but it was nice to have a Torah environment again. Again, from Jerusalem, I'm very spoiled with like what we have over there being offered. So here it's sort of slim pickings. However, I'm with my brother, so I'm just learning with him, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds very nice.
So that was very fun. And also, there's like it's built in with its own drama. There's like, for example, yesterday my brother and I were going to learn, and my sister wanted to join, and I was like, oh, for sure. And then I was like, oh, 1 second, but should we ask the people if they're going to feel comfortable if she's sitting and learning with us and whatever. It didn't end up working. She couldn't end up coming anyways, but I'm sure there's some people over there that would feel it's like less comfortable, not with her learning, but her learning with us. But these should be our problems in such trying times. Yeah. Okay. Where did we stop off?
I'm pretty sure that we finished 2, right? We talked about the different traits.
Right. We spoke about the traits. We mentioned how. Hey, Kirk. I hope all is well.
Hey, how's it going?
Thank God. Praise the Lord. We spoke about how these traits are. We gave an example how 7 of these traits also correlate to like 7 people from the Bible, and we also spoke about busha, and we played around with that language of also, is we even hinted on potentially shamefulness being sort of, or bashfulness being the root of sin, right? We said, and we connected that for Shaloid Boshashu, that Adam and Eve, before they sinned, they were unashamed, right? And basically the whole question with regards to once they sin, and this leads to like once there's doubt, right? Am I supposed to eat from this or not eat from this? What did God say? This also leads to a place where like evil could creep in once there's uncertainty in a certain sense, and we want to go back to this potential, this this being one with God and so certain of it that we don't even have to feel ashamed about that anymore. Obviously, we're not in that place, and we also went on a little tangent, if I recall correctly, about what's attributed to David HaMelech about the nation of Israel being Rahmanim and being bashful, and then we talked about that whole concept of just the nation of Israel and like its constant questioning itself, right? Because it's a uniquely its catalyst is unique, right? By it's a free will sort of thing that Abraham took on for himself, unlike other nations that sort of have it like naturally. Here there's sort of a question of, do you want to do this? And he says, Lech Lecha, and he goes forth and he actually wants to do this. That leads to us always asking a question: should he have gone? Should he have left the door? Should he have left Haran? Should he have just stayed? But yes, but we're going on that tangent again. Anyways, yes, go ahead, Kurt.
Just before we get started, I just want to clarify: little to no continental philosophy this stream. I wouldn't know, by the way.
Continental philosophy this stream.
I wouldn't know. Like 30% of it's a joke.
What's a joke?
30% of me always bringing up continental philosophy.
Oh, I thought you meant like 30% of the Rambam's a joke. I'm like, I don't know about that.
No, 30% of my gig. So like 70% is serious. 30% of me bringing up continental
I hear
philosophy.
you.
Because
We'll definitely play with some philosophy. Aristotle gets brought up again, but we'll see. You'll tell us. You'll tell us, Kirk. Illuminate us. If you sense it there, let us know.
We'll have to figure out if it's serious or if it's a joke.
Exactly.
Okay. Aristotle's not continental philosophy, but he's a pretty cool guy.
Take it away, Ben.
Okay.
Or I'll read it in Hebrew, and you could read it in English.
Okay.
והרבה פעמים יטו, one second. Okay. והרבה פעמים יטו בני אדם באלו הפעולות, ויחשבו אחד מהקצוות, טוב ומעלה ממעלות הנפש. פעמים יחשבו שהקצה הראשון טוב, כמו שיחשבו המסירה לסכנות, מעלה, ויקראו המוסרים עצמם לסכנות, גיבורים. וכשיראו מישהו בתכלית זאת המידה, רצינו לומר שמוסר עצמו לסכנות, ומוסר עצמו למיתה בכוונה, ופעמים ינצל במקרה, יחשבו בזה ואומרו עליו שהוא גיבור. Right? I'm running into fire suddenly I'm a hero. ופעמים יחשבו הקצה האחרון שהוא טוב, ויאמרו על הפחות הנפש שהוא סבלן, ועל העצל שהוא שמח בחלקו, והנעדר הרגש, ההונאות לאובי טבעו. And wait, your thing just scrolled? Okay. שהוא נעזר, כלומר יראה חטא. ועל זה המין מן הטעות יחשבו גם הפיזור ויתרון טוב הלב מן הפעולות הטובות. וזה כולו טעות. ואומנם ישובח באמת הממוצע, ועליו צריך לאדם שישכון וישקול פעולותיו, כולם תמיד עד שיתמצאו. Take it away, Ben.
Well, so it often happens, however, that men err as regards these qualities that we've spoken up, that we talked about last week, imagining that one of the extremes is good and is a virtue. Sometimes the extreme of the too much is considered to be noble, as when temerity is made a virtue, and those who recklessly risk their lives are hailed as heroes. Thus, when people see a man reckless to the highest degree, who runs deliberately into danger, intentionally tempting death, and escaping only by mere chance, they laud such a person to the skies and say that he is a hero. At other times, the opposite extreme, the too little, is greatly esteemed, and the coward is considered a man of forbearance, the idler as being a person of contented disposition, and he who by the dullness of his nature is callous to every joy is praised as a man of moderation, that is, one who eschews sin. In like manner, profuse liberality and extreme lavishness are earnestly extolled as excellent characteristics. This is, however, an absolutely mistaken view, for the really praiseworthy is the medium course of action to which everyone should strive to adhere, always weighing his conduct carefully so that he may attain the proper mean.
Right. So obviously some of this is, Rambam's going to be like hammering hard this middle of the road situation. We're going to hear a lot about it still. And hopefully one day we could actually implement it in our life. But right, he's letting us know about like sort of the pitfall of taking like sort of these ethical traits to the extremes, as we spoke about before, and how he gives like these examples of sort of the masses are gravitating towards like these extremes because they seem very clear and straightforward, right? Like, oh, he's a hero. This is what we're talking about, and we don't even know the context, right? Like he ran into the building, he came out with it, like this guy's a hero. Mm-hmm. This guy has a death wish, right? Maybe this person was completely being reckless. Do you have like 7 other kids in the house that you're just running in with zero training into this building? Like, is it nice that you want to be helping people, but you also have to be thinking of it, does this make sense, right? And ultimately, he's really stressing over here, which is, life is really found in this tension, right, between the extremes, right? Which is like always requiring this balance. You have to be able to find when this makes sense. And well, all these things, obviously, whether it's your spiritual, your material desires, or your personal autonomy, all these things obviously require a balance. And ultimately, this also leads to proper like growth and creativity. again, if you think about like artists that thrive on this tension, on this border between chaos and order, right? Like where you could actually find that balance. And again, we could see this while eating food. We spoke about in the past of like if I'm overindulging myself, it's a moral issue, or if not. And we spoke about perhaps also about the concept of Oneg Shabbat, right? Which is something that our sages talk about. What is part of Oneg Shabbat, aside from resting on Shabbat, which you could look at that as being lazy, but it's also the food itself of Shabbat, right? So here you see a place where this could be expressed if it's in the proper balance, right? If it adds sanctity to your life, right? If the meat and the aromas of Shabbat are doing more, then this is really demonstrating like religious observance properly and balanced with enjoyment, right? But if you're looking at someone that's acting completely out of whack, right? Shabbos is just an example, then we're not doing very well.
Right. So I guess it's interesting to me, like what he would go through if he explains this, he goes into it. But so basically, and he's saying that this is very hard to figure out, like what is the mean between all of these attributes, and that people make mistakes. So the question is, both on a personal, internal level and external level, how do you know whether what you're doing is the mean or it's an extreme that you consider to be a balanced approach, right? So how do you know if you're just procrastinating or just lazy and not just being contented with what you have? Or how do you know that another person that maybe you need to rebuke or help out or improve, how do you know that they're being so those questions this is like the tough stuff that you need to figure out how to.
Rambam's gonna first of all, those are fantastic questions. Rambam is gonna address these. His ultimate answer is Torah. We'll get there. I don't know if we're gonna get there today, but he does address that, and he sort of does a breakdown to those things, because in classic Rambam style, he also contradicts himself in other places, right? Where he does say go to these extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Gilad. Welcome. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Right. So Rambam does address those points, but again, giving the example of the masses, right? When someone sees something happen, it's much easier for us to decide to go with like sort of like the black and white answer, because it's much easier for us. It requires a lot less so much to be nuanced, right? There's so much nuance that it's almost become like, a dirty word. Like, I don't want to hear nuance. I want like your actual answer. But like at the end of the day, that nuance is in that tension, right? And you could even say acting in nuance is also too extreme, right? Like there's a time obviously to be more specific, direct. But nevertheless, finding that balance, which Rambam says is difficult, that is living though. That is part of the game that we're in, right? Evil is waiting at the doorstep. Tatim sholbo. It's not that just like it would be much easier if God just said like, why don't I just automatically control evil? Rather, it's always crouching out there. Nevertheless, you have the ability to control it, but that, of course, is a lifetime endeavor.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like there's like a circularity to it, in a sense of like you have a challenge in front of you that was created for you by God, right? You don't know exactly what is the true, and you don't exactly understand which thing is good in every context and which thing is evil in every context, and you need to find that out. But the same entity that gave you this challenge is also providing you with the directions of to figure that out. So it's like funny. I
mean, we even that dichotomy of evil, good and evil, where like we spoke about how like really it's evil is just an expression of good, right? Gone haywire, basically, right? It's ultimately on the same spectrum, and obviously there's Rambam will take a more Aristotelian approach to these kind of things, saying like we're all connected to God. There is this nefesh, but ultimately, if you don't use it potentially well, you're no longer tethered to it anymore. While the Hasidim and the Kabbalists will come and say you're always connected to this ultimate truth, basically. But again, that's for a different class, right? It's for this class, for a different section.
Chezi, so it would seem as though Judaism does not subscribe to like a Kantian deontic view of evil.
You're going to find a lot of different views of evil in Judaism. For example, again, like even what just I was explaining right now about the Kabbalists, which Jacob, our lovely Jacob, that we love so much, has a very hard time with like the Christian universalists, which basically say that ultimately everyone comes back to God. A lot of that discussion is that ultimately, while some people go through, these are metaphorical terms, but whatever hell means, ultimately, according to this thought, according to this opinion, everything returns back to the source.
But this is like metaphysical.
Yes, but you'll have people that obviously disagree with this, like the Rambam.
But what I was going to say is, this is kind of like a metaphysical assessment of what evil is, like on a metaphysical level. But I mean, on more of like a ethical level, or the ethics says that's not necessarily ontological or metaphysical. The idea, it seems as though you're saying that it's more like an Aristotelian virtue ethics as opposed to like a Kantian deontology, where it's not based on like rules that are universalizable maxims or categorical imperative, but instead based on like finding a mean between two different ends and trying to achieve virtue like that.
Well, that is what the Rambam will. That's definitely the Rambam's opinion. Yes.
But are there any rabbinic scholars who take more like a Kantian, I guess you say a Kantian view?
Yeah, there are. You want me to send you a list?
I mean, an example would be appreciated.
Well, you have them saying in a certain way. You'll have the Ramban that is going to take, in some cases, that kind of that attitude, and you'll have Rabbi Mendelssohn. He'll have Moshe Mendelssohn will have a connection to him as well. There's more, which I'm just not thinking about off the top of my head right now.
Okay, yeah. I was just, again, my interest in philosophy, the different ethical theories and how they relate to religion. But I think I'm sympathetic to both arguments, but like in general, I think the idea that like people should have a moderate temperament, or that like going too extreme with the maxim can be harmful, because people have nuance, which seems to be what Aristotle talks about, the idea of the golden mean. I think is often true.
I mean, right. So he's obviously, Maimonides is heavily inspired by him, and like we mentioned, there's others that had this philosophy as well, and it's tried and true. I mean, this is what we're going to see in this next section, where he also sort of connects us to. He loves connecting it as an analogy to medicine, but tough. Let's dive into it. You ready, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Gilad, any thoughts, words, or you're with us right now?
I'm with you. I was just thinking about like something quite on left field, which the Rambam talks about, how you would see a person with an extreme and you would call that person virtuous. You would mistakenly call that person virtuous.
Right.
And I was thinking about how that relates to a different philosopher, Iris Murdoch, who actually describes the opposite situation, where you have a view of someone as being faulty, and you look at them as a coward, or as any vice that you can think of. And she describes like the personal process of learning to see more of them, and maybe they're not a coward, maybe they show forbearance, maybe they're like, because I think the Rambam is definitely focusing here on the effect of how you would misguide yourself by seeing people who have vices, and you would see that as virtues and try to emulate that. But I think there's another side to that, which is definitely off topic for this chapter, but it's like, what does it do to you when you look at people through that lens of the ideal, rather than lishpot otam lichav zchut?
Right, when it comes to judgment.
Right, because Gilad, exactly what you're talking about, what you ended over there, which we clearly have in our sages teach us, which is Havei dan kol adam l'kaf zchut, right? You should be assuming the best, right? And we've spoken about many times how you even go like there's in Likutei Moharan, it talks about going to the extreme, right? Finding like even in someone wicked, finding like some element of goodness in him, and trying to elevate that, right? So it's a good question. What does one do? What does one do to himself when he's looking at the other in that way? Now, again, I would say that the Rambam is mentioning this because he is letting us know sort of that is the easy route also of making decisions, right? Like this guy is like, in an echo chamber, or this guy is sort of, I'm going to just start building upon him that he's like Superman. And, obviously that could be very, very problematic. So one should challenge himself, of course. And more than that, even if the guy is a hero, right? You run into the building because you're a good guy and you're a hero. Still, as a society, should we look at that? I mean, I'm going to go to an extreme example over here, but in Israel, as we all know, we're having a war, and you have all these amazing heroes, unfortunately, that died in war, like a lot of these soldiers. What's unfortunate, though, is a society, which is a demand that we should have towards our ultra-Orthodox brothers and sisters. Taking a step back, this is Jacob's channel. He doesn't promote Zionism. Okay, now, you have a situation where you have fathers and husbands dying, right? And you're creating a sense of widows and orphans in Israel. And while these people are heroes, really we should be saying like, that's great, but there's a whole population of single people that could be used. And as a society, like, are these really heroes if they're allowing themselves to be put into the system, which is like a crazy system, which like, yes, we understand you fighting, but like, why is it happening in this manner, right? So the guy that's running into the building, that's great, but like, really, shouldn't the fire department be taking this? Why do we want to be in a society where like people feel the need right now to be running and doing these things? And that doesn't make the person not courageous. It just means that he's potentially in a system where he thinks this is the proper behavior.
I think there's that phrase, heroes are only needed when things have gone very bad, right? Like when things are on the mend, then no one needs to be a hero, and that's like when the heroes are found. But I do think like there is a point that comes to mind with respect to the Rambam's points. There is how do I phrase this? That I think there really is a tension between trying to be the best that you can be as a person and look at the world as sort of the guidance for you to do that, to look at people, like how do they live up to their potential and how do they fall from their potential, versus the sort of approach that says like in order to be a good person you actually need to לשפוט אותם לכף זכות, and to sort of assume less about your own sort of judgment and your own knowledge of where they, because I think like you can't avoid that. If you want to become better, you need to look at the world around you and see how people are behaving and what is virtuous and what is a vice. And at the same time, there's that contrast that if this is how you frame your whole world, then you're bound to be less capable of connecting and seeing people's potential, I guess, or something like that.
Why would you be less capable of doing that? I mean, if your dichotomy is that, right, you could be more balanced, that you or another person can be more balanced or less balanced, that does not necessarily necessitate you being actively judgmental against them, right? Maybe it helps you Maybe it has no effect. Maybe it also helps you empathize with them more because you.
I guess just to try to clarify it a bit more, or to focus it a bit more. I'm just saying that there's a sense that the Rambam requires you to have a sort of pursuit of the truth and the knowledge of the situation. Is this really, like, am I looking at this correctly? Is this really a virtue? Right? Or I should suspect that this is actually a vice. This is what he was talking about in the previous section. This is a vice, and it's only praised as a virtue by all the people. And I think that does come as a counter to trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. Right? You need to give them less of the benefit of the doubt. Like, this looks like a vice to me. I'm not going to wave that off. Is what
I think. I just want to comment and say, Ben, you were teasing this out a little with this tension of sort of, how do you know, right? Because we can't deny, like Gilad is saying right now, and in the context of the Rambam, the name of the game is getting to the muskalot, right? Getting to higher places, understand the reality around you, because by doing so, by understanding truth, by being grounded, right? By becoming this, by unifying, as we spoke about in earlier chapters, with the intellect, right? That's the end-all be-all game. That's how you unify with God. So, of course, you're right, Gilad, that Rambam is saying this is very much like, the iOS that I'm operating on with regards to how I'm looking at the world. His answer to that, and what we said, Ben, we would talk about later, which is, he says, we'll go through different elements over here where she sort of teases out, but ultimately it's to counterbalance that you have the Torah. The Torah itself is already giving you built-in tools which allow you to then, like, you could be pushing to a certain truth, but you have not to covet, not to steal, not to this. You see someone on the way and you need to help him up. You have ladun lekav zchut. All these things that the Chazal has given you have created you a sayag, a system which allows you to sort of create a balance for that. And we spoke about this in last week, which is the busha and the rachmanut and certain traits that, let's say, the nation of Israel has. It has counterbalances with, like, other commandments. Right. So there's a sense where you could allow yourself to be overcome. This is an extreme example and not to be used politically, but you could be like, you're a people that is generally, you allow yourselves to be taken over and you are slaves. So you'll have a law like Amalek, right, which will counterbalance and be like, you'll always have to remember to never forget what was done to you and being able to stand on your guard. So there's things that are given to you in the Torah to make up for certain traits that you have inside you. So the Rambam says, yes, the trait is to pursue the truth. And by doing that, that might mean, like you're saying, Gilad, that I might focus on people negatively. It's a good thing in my toolkit, I have a system that I have to first engage in before I do all these things, right? So before the Rambam starts judging someone, presumably he's looking it through a Jewish matrix, right? So like I'm assuming the Rambam would say, before I judge this person, right, there's me judging him, and then there's me judging him. Do I need 2 edim? Am I judging him like he's going to be put into a halachic context at that point, which then sort of clears up a lot of that issue or a lot of that tension.
Right, like tirok shenishba or whatever it would be.
Cal's writing some notes over here. How much of this is being able to gauge if people present their traits because they made an active attitude of the wages and because of the acting? Think of Rambam's Hilchot Tshuva, right? This is just someone doing something. But again, we could challenge, even if someone is he's presenting one of his traits, not because he's just unconsciously acting. Still, we could challenge that's one should be careful if he's just acting unconsciously but still creating damage, and being similar situations. Not to fall in order to reach true tshuva, right? How do I actually repent? Believe the man can keep also and still be a menuval. He does. And Rambam contradicts himself many times, and sometimes you're talking about how he is into the collective and how he is internally between himself, between him and Hashem, and between him and his keilah. There's much to discuss. All right, let's continue. Ben. Okay. Vid'u. שאלו המעלות והפחיתויות אשר למידות לא יגיעו ולא יתיישבו בנפש, רק בכפול הפעולות הבאות מן המידה, ההיא, פעמים רבות בזמן ארוך והרגילות בהן. ואם היו הפעולות בהן טובות, יהיה מגיע לנו מהן מעלה, ואם היו רעות, יהיה מגיע לנו מהן פחיתות. ומפני שאין אדם בטבעו בתחילת איננו בעל מעלה, אין אדם בטבעו, בתחילו איננו בעל מעלה ולא בעל חיסרון, כמו שנבהר בפרק השמיני, והוא ירגיל בלא ספק פעולות בקטנותו, כפי מנהג קרוביו ואנשי ארצו. אפשר שיהיו הפעולות ההן ממוצעות, ואפשר שיהיו מותרות או מחוסרות, כפי שספרנו, ותהי נפשו חולה. Can you scroll down? Yeah. ראוי שילכו ברפואתו כדרך רפואות הגופות ושווה, כשם שהגוף שיצא משווייו נראה על איזה צעד נטע ויצא, ונעמוד כנגד בהפכו, עד שישוב אל השווי. וכשישתווה נסלק ידינו מן ההפוך, ונשוב לעשות לו מה שיעמדהו על שווייו. כן נעשה במידת בשווה, והמשל בו, כשנראה אדם שהייתה לו תכונה בנפשו וחסר בנפשו מכל טובה לרוב החילוט, וזה פחיתות מפחיתות הנפש. והפועל אשר יעשהו מפעולות הרע, כמו שביארנו בזה הפרק. וכשנרצה לרפואת זה החולי, לא נצווה להרגיל בנדיבות, שזהו כמו שירפא מי שיגבר עליו החום, בדבר ממוצע שווה, שלא יבריאו מכל יב, אבל צריך שנביאהו לפזר, ויכפול מעשה הפיזור פעם אחר פעם, פעמים רבות, עד שתסור מנפשו התכונה המחייבת לחילות, ויהיה קרוב להגיע תכונת הפיזור, ואז נסלק פעולות הפיזור, ונצווהו להתמיד על פעולות הנדיבות, וישקוד עליהן לא יותר ולא יחסר. Rambam, so much to say. All right, take it away, Ben.
That's it. Know, moreover, that these moral excellences or defects cannot be acquired or implemented in the soul, except by means of the frequent repetition of acts resulting from these qualities, which, practiced during a long period of time, accustoms us to them. If these acts perform their good ones, then we shall have gained the virtue. But if they are bad, we shall have acquired a vice. Since, however, no man is born with an innate virtue or vice, as we shall explain in chapter 8, and as everyone's conduct from childhood up is undoubtedly influenced by the manner of living of his relatives and countrymen, his conduct may be in accord with the rules of moderation. But then again, it is possible that his acts may incline towards either extreme, as we have demonstrated, in which case his soul becomes diseased. In such a contingency, it is proper for him to resort to a cure, exactly as he would were his body suffering from a physical illness. So just as when the equilibrium of the physical health is disturbed, and we know to which way is tending in order to force it to go in exactly the opposite direction until it shall return to its proper condition, and just as when the proper adjustment is reached, we cease this operation and have recourse to that which will maintain the proper balance. In exactly the same way must we adjust the moral equilibrium. Let us take, for example, the case of a man in whose soul there has developed a disposition of great avarice, on account of which he deprives himself of every comfort in life, and which, by the way, is one of the most detestable of defects and an immoral act, as we have shown in this chapter. If we wish to cure this sick man, we must not commend him merely to practice deeds of generosity, for that would be ineffective as a physician trying to cure a patient consumed by a burning fever by administering mild medicines, which treatment would be ineffectuous. I don't know if I'm reading it right. We must, however, induce him to squander so often and to repeat his acts of profusion so continuously until that propensity, which was the cause of his avarice, has totally disappeared. Then, when he reaches that point where he is about to become a squanderer, we must teach him to moderate his profusion and tell him to continue with deeds of generosity and to watch out with due care, lest he relapse either into lavishness or niggardliness.
So clearly we see that Rambam is here an echo. Hello?
Yeah.
We see the Rambam over here focusing and pointing out, obviously, that the role of actions and like society with regards to like forming one's character ultimately, right?
Mhm.
So like while we are born with certain inherent dispositions, right? Like the raw material of our traits, through our actions, these things are actually refined and they're only battle tested, right? Like in the real world, like in contrast to someone else. And the way I act is heavily defined by the relationships I have with my society and who's developing my character. So we have to, first of all, be sensitive to the fact, and it's nice that Rambam's putting it obviously in context, right? Like who are we dealing with over here? Now, his analogy of the doctor, which we always go back to over here, obviously this is ancient medicine as far as we're concerned.
This is Aristotelian.
Correct, but that exactly as it is correct, Gilad pointed out, right? This is clearly what he's inspired from. As we started with the book, right? He's talking about like the great physicians, the great doctors.
Mhm.
He's not talking about Obamacare, but nevertheless, it is still very interesting to see that it still remains a very relevant insight. We know, obviously, that the bodies today have very intricate balances of like our fluids and our nutrients and our biochemical signals that go inside the body. So you could still use the concept of this balance that the body needs, right? As we know, there's too much water, too much exposure to this. So that is true. Miraculously, that's still true, that insight. And it relates to the soul, of course, as well, right? We need to create this balance. Now, from a psychological point of view, you would call this, let's say, maybe like exposure therapy, right? I'm terrified of elevators. You need to get on the elevator and go up and down, and only then you will create like this sort of extreme, this is like an extreme reaction to then create a balance, right? It's not enough to tell the person who's terrified of flies, here, like, I'm going to let you show, like, I don't know, a book about flies. Rather, he really needs to go fully into it. I am not qualified to tell you if this is actually like what he's saying over here, someone that doesn't want to spend his money and now they're telling him to like be going writing checks for everyone, right? So I don't know how that's actually going to work out from a financial point of view, but it is stressing the point where you need to get back to a balance, and getting back to a balance, as the Rambam is going to continue to explain, is not necessarily this geometric middle, right? It's to get back to that balance. It's embracing the pendulum swing sort of attitude, right? You swung one way, you're going to have to swing the other way to get back to that point. It's going to be too rough to stop, just right in the middle.
I feel like I want to push back on that a bit.
Push.
So one thing is, I think we do need to relate to how Aristotelian medicine was wrong, right? And how, like, he sees that basically Aristotelian medicine was thinking there's 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. And if you have an imbalance, you could be sanguine, you could be choleric, you could be like whatever element is overrepresented could hurt your health, and you would diagnose that. And if you had too much water, they put leeches on you to, take some of the blood out, and et cetera, et cetera. Like that was really the mindset that they had. And we know today, like, that it's far more complex than that. And I feel like his psychological analogy here is similarly out of date, right? Like, it's similarly, it really is the case that people can go much more easily from one extreme, one vice, to the opposite vice in a manner that does not help them reach the mean. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think, yeah.
Right, go ahead.
Can I tease two things there? So I actually think that Chezi, his analogy, or your Chezi, your analogy to to exposure therapy is actually, I don't think that that's what the Rambam talks about, because exposure therapy is like small steps towards some things, like, right? It's like small exposures to get you to there. And I think the Rambam is kind of talking about actually replenishing, giving you like a strong dose. But I do think, to maybe push back on Gilad, even though I think that what you're saying is like in the context of the Rambam, I think it's like probably obviously valid, but I do think that we might find examples of where physicians would still give people a very large dose of, let's say, if your body doesn't produce a certain hormone or it doesn't get enough vitamins, you would get a much larger dose of those hormones or vitamins in order to replenish your body, and then you would get to a mean. I'm thinking for I can't remember. Yeah, glutatatris. I don't remember what I think.
Thyroid gland.
Right. So I think that is the procedure for that, and it's for vitamins like vitamin D and things like that. So, but
I do know that in many other cases, or I know of plenty of examples where that's actually very harmful. Like if you have a lack, for instance, for cases of mental health, depression, right? If you get a massive dose of
dopamine
and dopamine, serotonin, all of the make happy hormones, then that becomes, right, you get desensitized to them, and it becomes much, much harder to get out of your bad state. So, like that, I think, like,
I mean, Gilad, I agree with you, and that's why I think, like what I said, which is like, I think the insight itself is there's something still to it about generally the body needs a balance, right? I agree that, right, this is outdated with that regard. And by the way, when I said exposure therapy, when I said it, I was thinking like they take him into the elevator right away. But you're right, if it's TP, correct, then that's not the point. We also know that if there's a starving kid and you just give him food, right, that's not going to work out well for him, right? So it's not, I would just say again, the insight is the Rambam is clearly, and what at the time, which at the time was like the peak of medicine, realizing at the time that the body is more complex than that, and there is a give and take, and there's a balance that needs to happen, right? So of course, if these things are no longer relevant, right, that then you should definitely go to your local psychologist, right? I wouldn't say open up this Rambam book and then just decide right now, this is how I'm going to deal with my problems. However,
or worse, how I'm going to deal with someone else's problems,
or how I'm going to deal with someone else's problem, right? I guess that is a little nerve-wracking if you walk into your psychologist's room and he's like, he just has this area posted on his wall. But there is a sense where you also see people come, let's say American Jewry come to Israel for the years many times, coming from more modern homes, and then they're exposed like to this extreme setting in this yeshiva in Israel where they quote unquote flip out, right? Or in Hebrew called like they get burnt, right? Because like they switch into wearing black and white now, and they're only like as if they were burned. But the idea was that while there's a sense where that's effective, quote unquote, if that's your goal, right? If I want you to become this model, I quote unquote got you. The question is how long that stays for, right? And many times at like a few years down the line, there's like again a pendulum swing where someone like feels like disgusted by that and pushed away for that. So yes, I think Gilad's point is true, which is while we appreciate the Rambam's insight, we do have to realize that some of these things are obviously no longer shayach.
When you
I do think one more thing, just and then we can go, Kirk. So I do think like that there are many good points that he's making here that do stand the test of time. For one, like his first part of virtues and vices is certainly the case, right? We see that the more existentialist view of like you just have this moment of making a choice. Is unjustifiable by any evidence in any way, right? You are what you have become accustomed to do, and virtue is something you need to build up over your life. That's definitely the way it appears to be. And I think with regards to finding the balance, I think the point I would take from there is that you do need to embrace, like you said, the pendulum swing, but only in the sense that it's what we would call in physics a restrained harmonic oscillator. Like there should be a force that's making it swing less and less. If it's swinging more and more or the same, you're not getting where you need to go. You need to converge towards something that doesn't have that much tribulation and extreme twists all the time. And I think he does say that, like in the general outline of what he's referring to.
Right. I think that's yeah. Because I mean I guess that's where the Torah part goes into it, right? Because you need to be able to define the mean, right, between these two extremes. What is the mean between, like, that could be just as subjective as the extremes themselves, right? You need to know where do you want that moderation force to actually at the end put you.
There's also a practical matter though of dealing with, like, when dealing with an individual, or let's say, you know, when a car is driving and it stops, the I'm blanking out the word, the centrifugal force. What's the force again? The
centrifugal.
Centrifugal.
I'm saying, or sort of like the inertia that I'm saying, you can't just stop the car right away, right? Like you have to allow for it to. I'm not using the right term, but you have to allow for
inertia.
it. I'm sorry.
Inertia is like,
right, but it's not. I'm saying there's a certain force word I'm looking for. Anyways, point being, yeah. So like I'm saying, when you're dealing with an individual, right, you have to, like, sometimes say someone yelling and screaming, just saying like, hey, like, calm down, is not necessarily going to like, you sometimes see this with a child. They could be many times a kid could be sort of he worked himself up and sort of into this tizzy, and yes, you should be there engaging and like being calm and being like, but sometimes you sort of have to like help the kid snap out of it, and that's like a more extreme reaction for a moment, because there needs to be, like, you know, hold yourself. But okay,
wait, just one more thing real quick.
Sure.
When you were speaking about Jews who are going from America to Israel, you said modern. Do you mean like modern Orthodox?
It's yes. I mean, modern Orthodox, these terms are tricky in today's day and age, and it's not coming from a place of judgment. But I would say that the kids in America, let's say, that are going to schools like Frisch or Heschel, are coming from houses that are probably, their observance is more lax traditionally. That doesn't mean they don't see themselves as Orthodox Jews, or nor that I'm belittling their relationship with the Master of the Universe. However, when they come to these schools that their parents are paying $25,000 a year to or more, the school then tells them, hey, guess what? Like, what you're doing at home, it's all wrong. And like, these things, you can't act this way. And you got to change. Now, even if these things are true, there's a whole strange dynamic there, which is like the parent doesn't necessarily want the child to come back different. Having said that, they're paying sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars for an education that very much pushes towards this direction. So it creates like this whole weird tension within the child himself and the parent and the institutions they live in. But that's for just chatting, Jacob.
Yeah.
Where you can
Okay.
Also, one tiny thing.
Please.
Actually, it's not a tiny thing. It's probably a pretty big thing. But just when both of you were mentioning, this is something I just don't know enough Rambam to know. When you were mentioning that the Torah is the way to find the mean, does the Rambam mean this in the purely intellectual sense? Like, not in the lived Torah, but in, like, it literally tells you what you should be like, what you should act like through the Torah and the Halakha? Or does he have a room to speak about, like, living out the way that the Torah is telling you is the way to reach that mean, which is ill-defined, let's say? How does the Rambam see that?
I would say sort of both. Like, clearly you could see he's bringing in external influences, right? And he's synthesizing them into his learning. So he's very much aware of that. And he's also famously aware of saying that, like, you know, the sacrifices, right? This is due to the context of the time, and like we were bloodthirsty and we had to deal. So he's very aware of the context. Even the commandments are being given to a people in a certain context, right? So he's aware of that as well. And while he stretches his imagination to say, like, can you imagine there being like a metal bird flying in the sky, which we know today is a plane? He was clearly trying to stretch his imagination to see how far can I use this to map everything around me. Now, when he looks at the Torah, as he believes, there's, I would say, yes, literally the Torah in the Rambam of the Mishnah Torah expressing it that way, and then the Rambam in the Guide to the Perplexed is expressing it to you like on a different level, which is there's how this is being expressed to the masses, and then there's how this is understood by, and then it's the far and few between or the perplexed. But I would say that the exact question you have and the perplexity you have right now, or the question you're having right now, is what he's addressing later on in life, which is like, yes, this is a system which I'm going to say, literally, this is it. And then I also understand that this system is speaking to people in a certain way, in a certain context, and having a conversation with the whole world out there, which is also trying to integrate as well.
Right. I would just say shortly, I mean, I would agree with Chezi, if that was meant for me as well. With like, it's both the written, it's both direct and oral, meaning it's flexible, it's living in the moment. I mean, for me, that's the idea of having both the written Torah and oral Torah, in however, like in a general as general concept, was something that was very kind of useful for me to understand. In the same way that, for example, when you give a blueprint for a group of engineers or builders to build a house, you write all the specs of the house they need to build, but you don't tell them when they need to take their pee break or anything like that. But the pee break is what they need to do in the moment in order to actually make it happen, right? They need to understand and when to eat and the small things. I mean, when I do like software development, right? One of my goals is, or one of my jobs is to let people know what needs to be built, how it needs to be built, stuff like that. And so there's ways where I can do that written out very specifically, and then I need to do it generalized, and then I need to create space for flexibility. So that idea for me, I found that very useful.
I would just dovetailing on that, I would just say that dealing with, let's say, blueprints, that example, you also write on the bottom, which is the contractor clearly has to relay this to what's on the ground and the reality on the ground. Right? It's very nice that I said, like, this is going to be the distance and this is going to be this, but on the ground, how large is my actual window? Can your plans actually work, or do they need to be adapted for what's on the ground? Right. Number two, we obviously know v'chai b'hem, right? This is something that we're supposed to live. It's an embodied living text, right? We could argue that much of it has been ossified due to many different factors over 2,000 years, and now because of politics. But like, generally speaking, it's supposed to be a living Torah. And lastly, the king of Israel was known to, aside from reading the Torah out to the people during Hakel, he also had with him a little mini Sefer Torah that was supposed to be with him at all times, right? And you could look at this as in, like, he's literally walking around with like a little Sefer Torah. You could also look at this from a place of, there needs to be the actual Torah that's written out, that's sitting inside the chamber, which is like, this is like the written Torah. And then he has to have the Torah on his heart, but with him all the time. That's the dynamic Torah. That the king now needs to realize that, like, that's great that it's in this chamber, but now I need to actually rule, interact with people, and that Torah needs to be with me at all times, meaning it needs to be alive and dynamic as well. Unfortunately, we for many good reasons, again, we've slowed down that process significantly, almost to a place where it's halted. But hopefully, shwaya shwaya, we will renew. As they say. You want to continue? What's your timing like, Ben?
I have a few. Yeah, I have like 5 minutes or like 10 minutes.
Okay, so let's do this last section.
Mm-hmm.
Can you scroll down?
Kind of lost myself. Just a sec.
Wait, where were we?
Actually, Cal also had something interesting. I don't know if we want to touch on that or one of his comments.
Your tier, but we continued on more than that, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, there. Yeah, correct. There, I think. Yeah. But you wanted to bring up Cal's comments?
Yeah. What did he had? One comment that was curious. Well, he was talking about Rambam being a blank slatist, where he says that a person doesn't come innate with him with either a virtue or a vice.
I don't think that's a blank slatist. He doesn't say that people don't come with personality. It's just virtue and vices.
It's affected by their environment heavily. We just can't ignore. Yes, he said, like we mentioned, you have that raw material, but it's only relevant, like I said, when battle tested, right? Like, and you can't do that in laboratory conditions, right? Let's just see how this person actually works, talking to a mother, father, community, neighborhood, people clicking a pen next to him. Then we'll see how they ultimately
But I think specifically to the blank slate thing, right? Like, you are born with a personality. You're not born with a character, right? Like, I think that's the main point. You're not born virtuous or viceful. That's what you develop in your life. I mean, that's just, it's not. It's sort of like, that's the way that it's by definition. That's the way that you separate those things. You can have inclinations.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they become virtues or vices. That depends what you do in your life.
And this would relate to ethics of our fathers, right? Like, where are you spending your time? Where are you going? What are you doing? And that's all because they're very aware of this, right? Like, these inclinations need to be fostered if they want to be developed properly. Which is also the anger that we have with our sages that talk about Jacob and the ladder, right? Which is like the potentiality someone has to go up this ladder, right? But like, you could also stay on the ground and go nowhere, right? It really depends like what you do with the potential you have.
Yeah.
Okay. Right? We're talking about the guy earlier that we said our advice to our medical approved advice to him was to spend all his money. פועל החילות פעמים רבות כשנותו פועל הפיזור, וזה החידוש הטוב. הוא סדר רפואה וסודה, and it's secret. והוא ששוב האדם מן הפיזור לנדיבות, יותר קל ויותר קרוב, משובו מן החילוט לנדיבות. וכן שוב נהדר הרגשת ההנאה נזהר ויראה חטא. יותר קל ויותר קרוב לשוב. ושוב בעל התאווה נזהר. ולזה לכפול על בעל התאווה פעולת היעדר ההנאה. יותר משנכפול על נהדר הרגשות פעולות התאווה, ונחייב על ערך הלבב מסירות עצמו לסכנות, יותר משנחייב המוסר עצמו לסכנות רכות הלבב. ונרגיל הנבל ביתרון טוב הלבב, right, we spoke about this earlier about טוב לב ונבל, יותר משנרגיל מי שיש לו יתרון לב טוב בנבלה. זהו סדר רפואות המידות וזכרהו. Remember. All right, so he's talking about, again, this sort of like this symmetrical balance we're going to have, but take it away, Ben.
Asymmetrical in this case.
Correct. Sorry. Asymmetrical balance.
I picked the wrong moment to actually get my
bounce out. It's okay. We'll continue from that one later on. Ben?
No, I can do it. This thing. Okay. If, on the other hand, a man is a squanderer, he must be redirected to practice strict economy and to repeat acts of niggardliness. It is not necessary, however, for him to perform acts of avarice as many times as the mean man should those of profusion. This subtle point, which is a canon, a secret of the science of medicine, tells us that it is easier for a man of profuse habits to moderate them to generosity than it is for a miser to become generous. Likewise, it is easier for one who is apathetic and eschews sin to be excited to moderate enjoyment than it is for one burning with passion to curb his desires. Consequently, the licentious man must be made to practice restraint, more than the apathetic man should be induced to indulge in his passions. And similarly, the coward requires exposure to danger more frequently than the reckless man should be forced to cowardice. The mean man needs to practice lavishness to a greater degree than should be required of the lavish to practice meanness. This is a fundamental principle of the science of curing moral ills and is worthy of remembrance.
Right. So we touched upon this in our discussion beforehand, but basically, ultimately, achieving this balance really, again, involves like a nuanced approach and often leaning a bit towards the opposite extreme of one's natural tendency rather than finding, like we said, like this geometric middle of like where I'm supposed to be. Right. So there isn't like a strict law, a code to this, but like if I'm going to, I'm spending too much, right? I don't need like many, many, many small acts of being frugal, but rather I might need just a few significant adjustments. And it really depends sort of who each person is and what his tendencies are. And remember this.
I don't think that's what the Rambam is saying here.
Why do you not see that?
He's just saying like there's an asymmetry. The one with the lacking property is easier to develop, needs less work to develop to get to the mean, than the one who is at an abundance. So
it's not finding that geometric. Like we're not telling that guy.
No, I think he says like you're still finding the geometric mean, but it takes less work for the one lacking than it does for the one with abundance.
So first of all, I hear what you're saying. So I'll try to refine it. It's going to be specific for individuals, and they're going to find their own balance. Which, yes, for them it's that balance, but it doesn't mean that the one that squanders needs to do 5 acts, and the one that does needs to be 5 acts as well. It might take 2 acts for him and 4 acts for him, or 2 small acts for him and 5 big acts for this guy. It has to have sort of their own tendencies. Not that like it always goes back to the middle. If you did this thing, so there's like 5 acts that you do, and vice versa.
So does he say before somewhere that it's individual per person, or do you read it into this? I'm
reading this into him because we're talking about the whole just earlier about someone's born into the context that they're in, right? So that person is going to express his tendencies differently. And now we're saying like, okay, you're spending too much. First of all, there's the halacha requirement, right? Which is always going to be sort of like your
minimum
benchmark.
Yeah, your benchmark, right? Your barometer, so to speak. But then, as an individual, right now, right, I'm like squandering too much, right? So it's not going to be like someone that squanders needs to do these acts. It's going to be you're going to have to see how this person is actually acting and what the specific trait he's dealing with is.
I agree with you. I'm just not seeing it.
You're saying you're not seeing it there?
Yeah.
But
I read it into the way I'm reading it, and the way at least it was also taught to me. Yoter kal v'yoter karov mishuvo min harechilut lenedivut. Right? It's for a certain person, it's easier than the other person, right? But we're talking about there is the pizur and the nedivut, right? Which are in theory supposed to be 2 sides of these like the spectrum, right? And in what we would think, because we constantly talk about the middle, right? Which is someone that is pazran yoter midai, right? Someone that is spending his money too much is going to do these 7 acts, and someone on the other side is also going to have to do these 7 acts. And we're told that no, that's not the case. Instead,
one path is easier. It's like no matter who the person is, like
no, but we don't know that if that's true. There's
Chezi, Gilad is right.
We're glad you're here. First of all, Jacob, how are you?
Baruch Hashem.
How's your family?
Baruch Hashem.
I'm glad to hear that.
But Gilad is making an incredibly important point, which is, I believe, the point that the Rambam is making, that there is an asymmetry here. And that is precisely what he says. No. You keep on going, yes, and which what you're saying is true, that there is it depends on each individual path, but at the same time, he's saying that there's an incredibly important part of it, right? That somebody who is more constrained, right? This goes back to it says in the Ten Commandments, I will remember the love of God, right, onto 1,000 generations of those who love me, right? But I visit to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, right? There is an absolute asymmetry between good and bad here, between left and right.
I don't see that as far as what Gilad is saying. I think maybe I'm wrong. I think Gilad's challenge over here, because I think we both believe that there's an asymmetry. Gilad is saying that it's not necessarily talking about, I could be wrong, Gilad, about like individuals over here. Rather, he's just stating that there's like, for some people, like depending on the traits, some traits are easier to come back from and some traits are harder. And that's just the asymmetry.
No, not some traits. Like on every axis, there's one axis, there's one side that's worse than the other. Like if the axis is generosity, or not generosity, avarice versus profuseness, then he says it's much easier to come back. For everyone, it's much easier to come back from profuseness to generosity than it is from avarice to generosity. And
so
the point whether it's individualistic is separate. It's just not.
Your argument is here is me just making it like more personal over here. But like I agree with that he's stressing over here that while we're talking about this Shvil HaZahav, this middle path, that there is an asymmetry. That I agree with you, but I need to think about this. This is sort of how I've always read this to being more like it's also stressing the fact that it's about the people itself.
Well, this is like you said, the Chai B'hem, right? You're reading it again, and now you're thinking about it again.
I'll end just because we read the Rambam. We always try in our class in these things to spice it up with a little mysticism, just to create that balance. So the Ashlag, the Baal Hasulam, he gives this. He basically talks about how the evil inclination is this self-centeredness basically, and the good inclination is one that's focused on others. And it's this whole conversation about a creator and created, right? With God is giving, is his will is to give, and the created is his will is to receive. And the Ashlag talks about how we start off with this sense of just wanting, and we have to learn to get to this balance of understanding to give. But the example he gives is, he breaks it down to the 4 stages of, let's say, of growing up, which is an infant is only receiving the kabel al-manat la-kabel, receiving in order to receive, okay, or in the sake of receiving. Right now, the child just wants all the time. Now, and if it doesn't get what it wants, it starts crying, it starts screaming, and we as parents, we indulge it. And this makes sense, and it's age appropriate, right? Because this is all he knows. Obviously, if we're talking about, if this was true about into someone being an adult, he would be considered completely selfish. Then as the child grows, as my children are in right now, it's giving to receive, right? I'm going to clean my room because I get more time to read my comics. And that's sort of like the game that they're playing. And this too also makes sense at this age, as we say, Chanoch anar lefi darko. I have to sort of play a certain game with the child. But if this, again, if this continued to adulthood, you're looking at someone sort of that is only cares about like really his personal gain. And then you have the adolescent. And the adolescent right now is in a different problem. He is just in this mind of being just giving just to give, right? I don't need anything. I want to give to the world. I want to do stuff. I want to volunteer. Now we like that, but that's a very, very short period of time where you could play with that, because at some point that becomes too intense. I would even argue, and Jacob could chime in over here, being more professional or being in this profession, just even with regards to suicide, right? Sometimes there's a sense where they're embarrassed even to ask for help. Right. There's like, there's nothing that I need to be doing more or giving more. And that could be off balance. And lastly, which hopefully you get to, is realizing finally that you want to receive in order that you could then give, right? So I'm accepting the fact that I could receive something, and I see myself as a real person, and I understand I'm allowed to receive, but then I see the other, and ultimately, as God wants me to see his image, I see the other as coming from God, and I want to give back. I want to give back to the Zulat. And as far as the Ashlag is talking about, and you could say that the Rambam's also talking about creating this balance, and people have to, throughout their lifetime, have to build on getting to this balance. But Ben, I know you need to go, so we could end on the Ashlag.
Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. We can continue.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. We'll schmooze for a few more minutes.
Peace, Ben. And peace, Jacob.
Catch you later, Ben.
It was very.
Ben, 1 second. I'm seeing, and Jacob's left us as well. Did Jacob leave us? Jacob was
Yes, he left.
Gilad is right, Chezi. Okay.
Yeah, Hezi.
You're missing the point.
Okay.
Okay. Chezi's reading Talmud what is true, but that isn't the point over here. Okay. Well, Jacob came and saved us and explained to us what was the point and what wasn't the point.
So, Hezi, were you
in vertical videos?
I'm sorry?
Don't know why we're in vertical slices right now, but it's bugging.
I think I could be able to control that. 1 second. There we go.
I was going to say, your final point about learning to like care for us, that's a very Levinasian thing.
What was the Nassing thing?
It's a very Levinasian concept
Oh,
that you learn
Levinas.
the balance between your personal interests and needs and the interest of the other.
I mean,
I think it falls. I agree, and I think it falls exactly in line with what the Rambam is saying, right? Like the virtue, the side of each axis that it's easier is the side that it is other-centric. When you're self-centered, it's much harder to make you centered on the other, whereas when you're at that later phase, like you described, then you're already like one step from getting to where you need to go, where you need, it's okay to receive sometimes, rather than having to go through the whole journey.
I mean, it's interesting that, again, the Ashlag, that's what he defines, though, right? That self-centeredness, that is what he calls the evil inclination, right? You grow up thinking about it as like a little man with pitchfork and things like that, but ultimately, or you could call it the nefesh habehemit, right? Like it's the lizard brain, it's that part of you, or we spoke about in the earlier chapters, like it's the minotaur, right? Like that Icarus needs to fight inside the maze that the Greeks were trying to deal with, which is like, we know that there's a man, but there's a beast part of us as well. And we're stuck in this maze where we don't know how to get out of this. There's this animalistic part, there's this part of us that is very self-centered, that, wants to be focusing on himself all the time. And to your point, Kirk, when you said it's Levinas, but it ultimately goes back to the concept of tzimtzum, or the retraction, right? Where God is making space for the other, because the attitude is, I want there to be something else, someone else I want to play with, right? Be holy, for I am holy, right? So that's the constant invitation. And us mimicking God is doing the same. When we're talking to someone, can I create space for him? Downstream from that is ultimately something called like a good faith conversation, or steel manning, because that is at the very least having a conversation with someone where you are literally willing to listen and hear them, and that is creating that space for them, which is also why TLC is something that is something that I like, because up until now, it's very much create a space. When Paul says, like, tell me about the home you grew up in, that question off the bat is like an hour invitation for someone to say, here is your space to share, and we're listening to you. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen so often. And that's, in many cases, why people are attracted to this, not because they feel like they want to tell their story, but they feel that they're seen. And
they feel they're in Eichdau relationship.
I thou Booba relationship. Yeah. And that is the requirement ultimately. So that, that we could do that. In Israel, Gilad and I are dealing right now with a very hard time where you have two parties that don't see each other, and like less about like who's right and who's wrong, or who's more right or more wrong. still this, and this is true about the whole world, but there's a real hard time with people discussing things, and you can blame social media and different factors, but a lot of people don't want to listen, and many times, there's hard steps to that. Listening requires listening to sometimes to facts, right? And many times people don't want to hear certain facts or don't want to process these certain things or get offended by certain things, and if it starts by making space for the other, right? But if I see, and this is why we have to be very careful with the words we use, right? When I start othering people or they're vermin, then it's very easy for me to turn that off and not see them as someone I need to make space for.
Yeah.
I have to go. So
Gilad, one second. Saturday night.
Saturday night.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
See you then.
You got it.
What's going on with Gilad Saturday night?
Gilad and I have had ruminations about the state of Israel. It's more like.
Are you going to have a conversation about Israel on Saturday night?
Yeah, we've been having a series of different political conversations.
On Jacob's channel?
Yeah, I think most of them are private though, but or not. I don't remember. But yeah, we're gonna have. It's been a while. It's been a few months since we had one. A lot has been going on in Israel.
But are you going to have one this Saturday night?
Yeah, this Saturday night
on Jacob's channel.
I don't know about Jacob's channel. On one of these streams, I'll just start a stream and I'll start schmoozing with him.
Yes, on Jacob's channle.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I remember those conversations, and so for me personally, I've been kind of off and on with TLC. I don't come during the weekdays, but when it comes to the just chatting streams on the weekends that Jacob does, or sometimes nighttime just chatting streams, I've been participating more recently. And even though I obviously have many friends in real life, it's been nice socializing and meeting people from different cultures on this little corner.
Well, I urge you to quote unquote touch grass or chill with your peers. I do understand the predicament, well, not predicament you have, but troubles sometimes you'll have, which many people are not going to engage with you in these conversations. Definitely not at this age. You might have to wait 10 years for people to want to be discussing things like this with you. Just make sure that you create space and time for you to interact with people in real time.
I do at least twice a week.
We're also going to have a when Yosef feels a little better. He has a little tough flu, but we're going to do a Genesis deep dive into verse by verse of not definitely the first few chapters of Genesis, specifically through a interpretation or commentary, of a rabbi that I'm very close with. I mean that him and I are not personally very close, but I very much am into his Torah, and it's a mixture of many different approaches of Torah, and it's very, very deep and beautiful. So you could chime in on that as well.
What's his name?
Rav Shirky.
Oh, what's the first name? I know Rav Shirky. I just forgot the first name. I've heard of Rav Shirky, Razor.
Uri.
Booby Shirky?
Uri.
Okay, yeah. He sounds like an interesting guy, and yeah. So I'm excited to see if these conversations about Israel are happening, because with the recent ceasefire deal, or I think recently they've been discussing a ceasefire that America has negotiated.
Very complicated, very, very complicated, that situation.
And these kinds of things, I don't think the most about Israel. But just a little bit more recently, I've been trying to think, and I'm not a really political actor, right? I mean, I have political beliefs, but I try to. It's not a major focus of mine, but I do think having conversations about these sensitive issues are important. It's just one of the problems is that people have a lot of opinions about things that don't affect them, and while that's perfectly fine in a grander sense, they should. One of the problems is that they lose perspective. So how an American left-wing political commentator views Israel Hamas is very different from how an Orthodox Jew in Israel is going to see the war.
Yes, there's a lot of nuance there. I'll get into some of that with Gilad. To Cal, which Mefarshim and which rabbi? Rabbi Shirky is the rabbi. Rabbi Shirky is a student of, many different rabbis, but specifically Rav Manitu, Rav Yehuda Leon Ashkenazi, who is a student of Rav Kook. And that is a combination of both Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Torah approach of Rav Shirky. I mean, he's very much pushing the Noahide movement, which I'm very, as you know, I'm involved in. He has a great book, if you want to see his approach, called Nature and Holiness, which I recommend. Talks about many different topics, but you sort of see his approach over there as well. Zionistic, very Zionistic.
So has
you the name of the shaper in the chat? Yeah, 1 second. I want to confirm I got you. It's the right name. Nature Holiness. I mean, that's his only English one, I think.
So, sure. It sounds like, I mean, Jacob wouldn't be the biggest fan?
I'm sorry?
Would Jacob be a fan of his?
He's a very big Talmud Chacham, very smart and respected rabbi. So you can't just ignore him. However, I'm sure much of his opinions Jacob would have a hard time with, even though he is deeply he's well versed with secular philosophy, obviously Jewish philosophy, much of the Jewish literature, secular Jewish literature, and rabbinical Jewish literature, and mystical and
it sounds like somebody I would appreciate. And I actually heard that there's a rabbi in Israel who has not necessarily postmodern tendencies, but somebody named Rav Shagar, S-H-A-G-A-R.
Rav Shagar. Okay, so first of all, you're on the right path. Rav Shagar is also a student of Rav Kook, but Rav Yehuda Leon Ashkenazi and Rav Shagar went on the more mystical side, and then there's Rav Kook, which is called Yeshivat HaKav, which went a different direction, which is like a little more, I would say, a little more messianic. I would say I'm also messianic, so maybe that's the wrong term. But they took it to a different place. I'm trying not to come out against these great rabbis. But yes, Rav Shagar is very much in the approach of Rav Shirky as well, which some would see as controversial. Rav Shagar also has a fantastic book, Luchot v'Shivrei Luchot.
Yeah, do you know, speaking of messianism, so do you know who a fellow named Gershom Sholem is?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, because I think I've told you about, who Hannah Arendt was?
Faith Shattered and Restored by Rav Shagar. That's the name of the book in English. That's where he sort of deals with postmodernism. He gives it its day in the sun and tries to debate it. And in order to debate it, he needs to use mystical tools. It also has to do how postmodernism breaks down language and how that relates to some of the concepts in Kabbalah. And it's sort of an approach of realizing the quote unquote limits of traditional understanding. And this we were talking about earlier with Gilad, where Rambam talks about what the masses can handle. And then there's what the perplexed needs to deal with. And are we in a generation today, which Rav Shirky would say we are, where Kabbalah, mysticism, or the way he approaches it, sort of the way the prophets engaged with the Bible is how our generation should start doing again, and sort of remove the shackles of exile and start manifesting the Torah of redemption. That doesn't mean in any sense that the Shulchan Aruch or like many of these fundamental codex texts are not relevant. Rather, reinvigorating them with a new spirit and reminding people of the whole imaginary, experiential experience of Judaism as well.
Yeah. So what I was going to say with regards to Gershom Scholem is like he talked a lot about Messianism, and he had an interesting relationship. So like I was one time reading a Chabad article about Derrida, Jacques Derrida, and he was a Jewish. He was actually Jewish, I'm pretty sure. Jewish by nationality, not by religion. But the article was basically saying that like his deconstructive approach has parallels in Kabbalah, and it's interesting to compare with Sholem because Sholem's view, to my understanding, is that the Hebrew language has like an inherent mystical holiness to it, whereas Derrida was all about deconstructing language. So it's like that's an interesting comparison between like the idea that meaning is always deferred in Derrida versus like this sort of mysticism to the Hebrew language that Sholem has. But I don't know what exactly Sholem's analysis was. Like, did he? I don't know. Did he believe there's like a metaphysical significance, or I'm not quite clear about what Sholem meant by his analysis of the Hebrew language.
Yeah, I mean the way the Hebrew language gets also reconstructed later on, that's a deeper conversation. But Derrida had, Foucault and Derrida. Levinas also deals with these people as well, and Rav Shirky is also influenced a lot by the French thinkers. I think he's Algerian as well. Cal, I see
Shirky's Algerian.
Yeah, I believe so. I put on the chat also some of his works in English, which again, for example, if you look at let's see, is it here Zionism and Redemption? It says up here like the final redemption, Rabbi Shirky. Like I'm sure Jacob will have conniptions reading these things, but this is very much like sort of the Torah I'm a part of. But Cal, take a read, and if there's anything that you felt is noteworthy or you'd like to discuss, please feel free to send it to me. Well, according to Machon Shiloh, guys, it does mean reinventing the Shulchan Aruch. By the way, just with regard to that comment, we do know about there's a concept of Torah Mashiach, right? And I wouldn't even go that far. We talked about how, like, later on, it's all going to go according to Beit Shammai. So there is a change. Now you could be like, well, that's a change towards being more strict. I think we need to realize what as redemption engulfs us, and it's sort of a chicken and the egg. That's what we need to do to order to manifest this as well. But there are places that we're going to have to be more strict, and there's places where we're going to be more lax. But we're calling it lax right now. That doesn't necessarily mean it needs to. Maybe it's lax towards the standards that we had then. Just giving an example, there's a book called Living Treasure Trove, that's a loose translation. In English, it's called Gniza Chaya. Talks about Rabbi Shalom Sharon, this Ethiopian rabbi, Orthodox rabbi. And basically, he makes the case that the Ethiopian tradition and Jewry that potentially goes all the way back to King Solomon, right? We realize that we lost towards like what ended up happening with Judaism with the exile. However, we have this whole living tradition that shouldn't be ignored by Jewish literature and Jewish rabbis. And he gives an example how in Judaism we have something called Marit Ein, right? Which is don't do this, not because it's not allowed. Rather, someone might think that's what you're doing. And that's a problem. We don't want people thinking that you're acting not according to the halakha. Don't go to these places because people might think the worth of you. And the Torah or the rabbis were taking the opinion of that's how the human nature is. They're assuming the worst. In the Ethiopian tradition, that doesn't exist. Their attitude is, why would you assume the worst? And the second they made that switch of that's not how they see the world, so many of the restrictions that let's say we experience today as Orthodox Jews, they don't have. And that's not because they cared less or less spiritual. Rather, they grew up with a different mindset. Now we are where we are today. However, is it so crazy to think that as we grow, whether it's because of psychological and spiritual growth, or it's also coupled with I don't know, AI that allows you to be aware of micro expressions, and people's thoughts that lemar it ayin, or because someone might think something bad of you is no longer relevant. And that doesn't mean we decided to be more lax. Rather, the reality itself changed. So the change that I ask for, or that I'm looking for, is a revolution, or an evolution, which is going back to our roots, which is lo bashamayim, right? This is a Torah that is supposed to grow and evolve. Of course, it has to be done carefully, and there's always a slippery slope question. At some point, though, we come back, and that involves reestablishing the quorum of the Sanhedrin, and et cetera, et cetera. I see what Cal is saying, of course.
What does Gedarim mean?
Gedarim, he means offenses when he says Gedarim, especially in the age of chaos, even if they seem tenuous in nature. So obviously, it's a good point. The question is, it's Shuva elai v'ashuva elechem. Return to me, and I will return to you. The temple will be built when we want to build the temple, right? It's not a building that's going to fall from the sky. And in order for us to build the temple, we want to build the temple. And in order for us practically to want to build the temple, and for the miracle of that to happen, it'll be the people of Israel, the Jews in the world, doing that. And to think of how that happens, it's not going to happen because everyone wakes up one day and decides, oh, we all have to keep the Shulchan Aruch, and now we're going to build the temple. Rather, there's going to have to be an expression and a realization that in Judaism and in Jewish culture, there was always the Yehuda and Israel, ones that were more connected to the temple and its surroundings and practice things in a certain level to the masses on how those things were practiced. And we have to realize that the path one is on, we should be very careful to narrow that path, or people are getting pushed off when clearly people are looking and are thirsty to be added onto the path. But Cal, we could go about that. We could discuss that for hours, as I'm sure we will. And the only reason I got to say so much is because Jacob isn't here calling me a heretic. So again, Zionism bad, Chezi's a heretic, all the good stuff.
Okay.
Kirk, I'm going to shut this down.
Okay. It was nice speaking to you.
It was nice speaking to you too. Cal, thank you for joining and for your participation.
I'll look. I think I'll look into that. I might look into that Rav Shirky thing. I was just kind of confused what Sholem was talking about. But like, I don't know how familiar you are with his work.
When, again, Rav Shagar talks about this as well, but when you start deconstructing words, you also have to realize that like these words that create worlds, as the Zohar also talks about, they create certain narratives as well. And the sod, the secret of ultimately the secret of, you know what, Kirk, that is for I was about to just share a lot of stuff on mysticism, and then I reminding myself that is less than appropriate right now.
Okay.
You don't have to jump in there yet. Learn.
Okay. Well, will it be a public conversation on Saturday night?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, I think I'll see you then.
Yes, sir. Until then, have a great day. And like I said, I put 2 links. I put this link to Rav Shirky's page, like his website. Most of it's in Hebrew, but I linked the English section, which there's great articles over there, which are very interesting. And I also put the link to his book.
Okay. Yeah.
Take care, buddy. Peace.